Which one of you will be the bravest to enter? I'd like to be the first to tell you. Welcome to the dungeon. Good luck.
So to set the game up, you're going to all decide on an adventurer to go into the dungeon with. So you all play as the same adventurer, and you'll collectively agree on one to go in with. So we have the mage, the barbarian, the rogue, and the warrior. So we'll choose the warrior. And then you also want to set aside their equipment next to them, just so that way you know it's their equipment. So you can see the warrior's color scheme is like a bluish kind of color. So all the equipment for the warrior will be that color. It's the same for every other adventurer as well. And you want to take the monster deck, and we'll shuffle this. We'll set that next to the board. Then you want to designate an area where you'll be creating the dungeon. So we'll just say right here, and I'll get to that more in a little bit. Then each player gets a player aid. So this shows you the type of monsters in the deck and how many of that monster are in the deck. So we have the white side and the red side, and I'll get to the red side in a little bit. Then you want to set aside 5 success cards, and the rest will go into the box. All right, let's take this back up top, and I'll show you how to play. So to start the game, randomly select a player to go first. There's going to be several rounds consisting of dungeon and bidding phases. Now in the bidding phase, you're going to take the top card of the monster deck, you're going to look at it, and you're going to decide whether you want to put it in the dungeon pile or not. Or you can skip your turn for that round and not be able to participate in the dungeon phase. Now in the dungeon phase, the last player standing who did not pass takes the adventurer along with their remaining equipment and their health points. They go into the dungeon to see if they can defeat all the monsters within the dungeon. So for the bidding phase, you're going to take the top card from the monster deck, you're going to look at it, make sure nobody else sees it, and then you're going to decide whether to put it in the dungeon or not. So we'll play that in the dungeon. Now if you decide not to put it in the dungeon, you're going to take it, you're going to look at it, and then you'll play it face down in front of you, and you'll take a piece of equipment from the adventurer. So we'll take this one, and that card is discarded. Now you can always count how many monsters are in the dungeon deck, but you can never look at the monsters in there. Also, if you were wanting to remove a monster from the dungeon, but there's no more equipment left, so say all the equipment is gone, that monster has to go into the dungeon. Once all players have passed, except one, the remaining player will take the adventurer into the dungeon and try to defeat those monsters. So you're going to take the adventurer, and you're going to add up the total health points. So this one has 11, and he also has the defeat the dragon equipment. So this player is going to enter the dungeon. So you flip over the first card. The strength of this monster is 2, and this is the equipment they can be defeated with, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So the warrior has 3 HP, 11 HP. So this is not a dragon, so he takes 2 damage. So now he's down to 9. The strength of this monster is 1, so now he's down to 8. Again, this strength of this monster is 2. He's down to 6. And the strength of this monster is 4, and now he's down to 2. If you have an equipment that defeats the monster, you discard that monster without losing any HP. Otherwise, you take the damage equal to the monster's strength, as we showed earlier. So for example, we have the dragon spear, says defeat the dragon. Now if the dragon was in the dungeon, we could just defeat him without taking any damage. You will continue going through the dungeon until there are no monsters left. If you lose less health than what you had when you entered, you defeated all monsters. If the total health you lost is equal to or greater to what you had when you entered, you failed. You will flip your player aid over to the red side, and that counts as a loss. Now, if your player aid is already on the red side, you are eliminated. Let me go and explain the equipment tiles a little bit more in depth here. So we have the Vorpal Dagger and the Vorpal Sword. They both say defeat one monster that you choose before entering the dungeon. So the way that works is if you look at your player aid, it has a list of all the monsters that could be in the dungeon. So we have skeletons, golems, the dragon, the demon. So before you enter the dungeon, you could say, okay, I want to defeat all skeletons before I enter the dungeon. So the way that works is if you come across any skeletons in the dungeon, you would defeat them all using the Vorpal Dagger or Vorpal Sword. Then we have the Fire Axe. Defeat one monster after you draw it once per dungeon. So the way this works is, you're going through the dungeon, looking at monsters, then you come across one that you don't think you can defeat with your equipment and your health points. So you say, okay, I'm going to defeat this one using the Fire Axe. So you can use that once per dungeon and no more. You can't defeat multiples of the same monster with this card. So use it wisely. Next, we have the Demonic Pact. Defeat the demon and the next monster. So if you're going through the dungeon and you come across the demon and you use the Demonic Pact, it says defeat the demon and the next monster. So you would defeat the demon and whatever monster comes next. Now, if there are no more cards left in the dungeon, you would just defeat the demon. Warhammer comes next. Defeat all golems. So it literally just means you can defeat all of these that are in the dungeon. Use the Warhammer and defeat all golems. Next comes the Holy Grail. Defeat monsters with even-numbered strength. So those monsters would include the skeletons, the vampires, and the Lich. So going through the dungeon, you can if you have the Holy Grail, you can defeat all of these monsters. Then there's the Healing Potion. They both say, when you die, come back to life with your adventurer's HP once per dungeon. So if you went up against the goblin with the warrior and you only had your HP, so the strength compared to your health, he would defeat you. So then you would come back with the same health but no equipment. So you would have 3 HP to go back into the dungeon, basically. Then again, we come back to the Dragon Spear, defeat the dragon. So you just go in and you're immediately able to defeat the dragon. Then we also have the Torch. There's 2 of these. Defeat monsters with strength 3 or less. So that would be the orcs and the goblins. It's pretty much all there is with the strength 3 or less. Then we have Omnipotence. If all the monsters in the dungeon are different, you win the round. So this comes pretty much at the end of going through the dungeon. So you would go through, you have an orc, you got the skeleton, then you had the dragon, and you had the demon, and then you had the golem. Now, at the end of going through the dungeon, if you see that all of them were different, then you immediately win that dungeon. Polymorph is up next. Replace one monster you draw with the next monster from the deck once per dungeon. So the way this happens is, say you're going through the dungeon and you don't like that monster, so you can risk it and say, okay, well, I'm going to use the polymorph and I'll replace this monster with the next one from the deck, and you would get lucky. Now, if there are no monsters remaining in the deck, then you cannot use the polymorph. The Ring of Power says, defeat monsters with strength 2 or less. Add their total strength to your HP. So the monsters with strength 2 or less in the deck are going to be the skeletons and the goblins. So if all of these were in the dungeon and you had the Ring of Power, that's 2, 4, 6 that you could add to your health. So your health would become 9. And you would defeat the monsters. Last but not least, we have the Invisibility Cloak. Defeat monsters with strength 6 or more. So those monsters would be the Lich, the demon, and the dragon. So if you had the Invisibility Cloak, you could immediately defeat those monsters when you come across them in the dungeon. Now, if you look at the top right corner of all monsters, it shows you a symbol of which equipment you can use to defeat those monsters immediately. So we have the invisibility cloak and the dragon spear for the dragon. We have the Holy Grail for the vampires, torch and Holy Grail for the skeletons, Warhammer for the golem, torch for the goblins, torch for the orcs, invisibility cloak and Holy Grail for the life, invisibility cloak and demonic pledge for the demon. Every time you go through the dungeon, you gain a success card. The first player to 2 success cards wins the game. Or if all other players have been eliminated, then the last player standing wins the game. If you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell. I'll be posting more videos every week. Thanks for watching The Other Board Gamer.